Let's jump right into this explainer and completely shatter the illusion that the European higher education area functions as some single, unified regulatory bloc. I know, it's incredibly tempting to treat European higher education as this one shared space with a common rulebook, especially since we all use the exact same vocabulary when we talk about quality assurance. But as we're going to see today, agreeing on broad principles is very, very different from agreeing on actual legal proof. Because here is the core question we are tackling today. When a university teaches a program online or at a distance across a border, what must it actually prove? To whom and under which instrument? If you've ever tried answering that question for more than one European system, you already know the painful truth. There is no single answer. The systems differ wildly. To navigate this, we're going to rely on a really fascinating independent comparative reading of published statutes. This was put together by a higher education quality and governance professional based in India. Now, just to be completely clear right up front, this is an independent analytical reading. It is not legal advice, and it doesn't represent direct regulatory practice in these countries. But by keeping our lens strictly analytical and precise, we can see exactly how these different legal instruments actually operate. So here is our roadmap. We'll start with the European regulatory illusion, move on to Italy's prescriptive decree, check out Ireland's guidelines and due diligence, dive into Germany's accreditation and open questions, and finally, look at a build once, map many strategy. Okay, Section 1, the European regulatory illusion. We hear about the ESG 2015, the European standards and guidelines, all the time. But we have to recognize its limits. The Bologna process is intergovernmental and totally voluntary. The EU itself treats education as just a supporting competence. So while the ESG 2015 is a fantastic shared reference for quality assurance, it is absolutely not a direct license to operate. Building your evidence base just on ESG alignment won't give you what a national regulator is actually going to ask for. At the end of the day, national or even subnational law is what dictates the actual proof. Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, Italy, and its highly prescriptive decree. Italy's system is fascinating because of how incredibly specific it gets. They operate under a 2024 ministerial decree that literally sorts programs into 4 rigid delivery categories. The second your program falls into a category defined by online delivery, these hard numerical thresholds kick in. You're legally required to have a published service charter. You have to assign a specifically named tutor to every single learner. And they demand a strict mathematical minimum share of synchronous teaching. It's an intense, numbers-based checklist. But here's the catch that brilliantly illustrates how unique this system is. In Italy, your program might be categorized as entirely at a distance, but your graded assessments and final examinations, those are mandatory in-person events. They have to be held at registered approved venues, and they are verified by the national agency, ANAVER. So in Italy, entirely online describes how you teach, but it definitely does not describe the full learner journey. Now let's contrast that with Section 3, Ireland. Guidelines and due diligence. Under Ireland's statutory guidelines, the whole approach is deliberately non-prescriptive. Providers just need to have regard to these guidelines when they design their quality assurance. And their definition of fully online, it means exactly what it sounds like, the complete absence of any in-person requirement at all. It's a much cleaner, sharper line than the one Italy draws. However, Ireland puts a really unique burden squarely on the providers. When you're dealing with learners outside of Ireland, you can't just assume the risks disappear across the border. You have to actively conduct country-by-country due diligence. Basically, you have to prove 3 things. Can you legally operate in that target country? Does local accreditation apply there? And what exactly does local consumer protection expect? Ireland forces you to check the local law without answering the question for you. All right, Section 4, Germany. Accreditation and open questions. This is where things get genuinely wild. Let's look at the education side first. Unlike Italy's rigid math and minimum synchronous shares, Germany's program accreditation relies on a qualitative judgment. An institution has to present, document, and argue a totally coherent educational concept that justifies its online profile. You're defending a self-contained concept, not just taking off a numbers checklist. But sitting entirely outside of education law is this 1976 federal distance learning statute called the FERN USG. It's managed by a dedicated approval authority, and here's the kicker. If it applies to your fee-paying contract and you don't have prior approval, that contract is completely void. You could be facing fines, giving learners non-waivable termination rights, and they're suddenly bound to the learner's home court. So the million-dollar question. Does this 1976 Consumer Protection Statute actually apply to accredited higher education programs or to foreign providers contracting with German learners? The scary part is there's no express exemption for higher education in the text. Whether this statute reaches you is an open, unresolved legal question. It is absolutely not a settled rule. It's a massive legal risk that a purely educational review wouldn't even think to look for. Which brings us to our final section, Build Once, Map Many, the architectural solution to all of this. We are essentially dealing with a massive, fully online translation problem. The term simply isn't portable across Europe. In Ireland, it means 0 on-site requirements. In Italy, it still comes with a mandatory in-person exam. In Germany, you're bouncing between qualitative accreditation and a 1976 consumer statute. Because of this, you absolutely cannot rely on a single compliance checklist. So what do? You have to hold your underlying evidence completely separate from your jurisdiction-specific mappings. You need to gather these 5 core pieces of evidence. Who actually authorized the delivery mode? How is it explicitly defined? How were learners informed before they signed up? How exactly are physical venues and assessment integrity managed? And what, specifically, does your IT infrastructure record and retain? If you take only one thing away from this explainer, let it be this: build that evidence once and map it many times. By keeping your core, factual evidence isolated from the specific checklists of Germany, Italy, or Ireland, you're future-proofing your institution. When a regulatory change hits, and it will, you're just updating your mapping. You're not doing a massive, painful rebuild from scratch. Treating online as one single European category is working from a version of Europe that the laws themselves just do not support. So I leave you with this provocative thought to take back to your own team. Is your compliance built for a unified Europe that doesn't actually exist? Or are you prepared for the distinct, messy national laws that actually determine what you can do? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Get those evidence files separated, and I'll see you next time.